forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk, and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Dace.
Greetings and welcome to this week's episode of Bigger Ten. I am Steve Dace, and without further ado, let's get to it. Here's my co-host Aaron McIntyre as we do the rundown. This week's Big Five on Bigger Ten.
Well, Steve, it couldn't have ended any other way, could it? Not this season in the Big Ten. A three-way tie for first place atop the Big Ten standings at the end of the season. That would be Wisconsin, Michigan State, and Maryland, all finishing number one in the conference, not in that order necessarily. And it came down to the last Saturday, Steve. Level of surprise for you after everything this season boiled down to that final weekend. I mean, this was not. I mean, if you watched Big Ten this season, this was not much of a surprise. It had to end like this.
Indeed, and at the beginning of the year, Michigan State and Maryland were in everybody's preseason top 10. Michigan State was the consensus number one. So if we would have said at the start of the year or even at the start of the conference season, Michigan State and Maryland were going to share the championship, no one would have been shocked at that. Now, if we would have said 2 weeks ago, Michigan State and Maryland were going to share the championship, a lot of people would have been shocked at that. Maryland had a 2-game lead with 5 games to play. Michigan State looked like it was starting to pucker a little bit. And then Sparty began turning things around, finishing with a typical Tom Izzo March flourish. We've seen that for many, many a year now. Maryland limped down the stretch. I think losing 3 of its final 4, but beat Michigan on the final day to get a share of its first conference title since joining the conference. I think the big surprise is Wisconsin. And if you look at the job Greg Gard did this season, it's one of the best coaching jobs I have ever seen in the Big Ten. There is not an NBA player on this roster. When you look at, they didn't just lose Kobe King to a transfer in the middle of the year, their second leading scorer, but he had some things to say that ended up being confirmed about some racial tension within the program on his way out the door. That, particularly in this day and age of social media and everything else, where all your dirty laundry gets aired and you can't keep things like this in-house. I mean, a lot of other teams would have been probably destroyed from a team chemistry standpoint by something like that. Then you had what happened with Brad Davison and the nut grabber. I mean, they've had a lot of issues this year, and we didn't even mention they lost a generational player in Ethan Happ last season. For them to come back this year, they started 5-5 in the league. What is it? They won their last 9 in a row, or 8 of their last 9, I think it was. And to get a share of this championship, absolutely phenomenal job by Greg Gard in Wisconsin. And to put one more bow on this, Aaron, and then I'll let you share your thoughts.
Sure.
Since 1948, the Big Ten has been doing postseason awards since 1948 in basketball, all right? Since 1948, this is the first time that the Big Ten champion, or a team that won a share of the Big Ten championship, failed to place a team on the first or second all Big Ten basketball team. And that's your number 1 seed in the Big Ten tournament, the Wisconsin Badgers. So a phenomenal job by Greg Gard in what they did this season. Another typical, Tom Izzo, I think we just take it for granted what he does this time of year, but he rallied Michigan State again. And then I know Maryland right now, a lot of people are down on them because of how they finished the season, but still, Mark Turgeon did lead them to their first ever Big Ten championship.
Yes, and that's well said. And when you look at hitting on Wisconsin a little bit here, it seemed like after that Iowa game, and remember that thing with Kobe King went down right before the Iowa game. Oh, it's been over a month ago now. The Brad Davison controversy, we called him out as a dirty player, which that play and the history he has, every reason to believe that's the case. But it seemed like something happened in that locker room after that game where they just said, we ain't going down like this. And that's, I mean, as an Iowa fan, I hate that, but I mean, that's really cool to see. That's the power of sports and athletics. It's fun to watch teams come together like that and achieve things you really shouldn't be achieving, as you've noted, with that amount of talent on their team. As far as Maryland goes, still got to be happy. Still got to be happy you're here, even if it is a tie. I mean, you had this was yours for the taking, and outright, and you puckered, like you said, at the end. But still, usually when you pucker all the way. They pucker just enough to not lose themselves any share whatsoever. And then, as you said, I mentioned this before with Michigan State and Tom Izzo. What he does is really old school. Now, if we're going to be honest, and in the era of one and dones, where he actually develops players and he gets them to this point, and all season, I said this last week on Bigger Ten as well. They were making a lot of mistakes, a lot of sloppy play that
the turnovers were just dreadful.
That you just don't see Tom Izzo teams, that you just don't see him make very often at all. And here they are. They're champions again. That's, again, taking for granted. I think that's probably a pretty light way of putting it. Unless you've got anything else to add to that, we'll move on to looking at the Big Ten tournament, which gets underway as we're taping this today on Wednesday, March 11th. And Steve, I don't know if there's any major surprise. I'll put up the bracket here. So those of you watching on YouTube can see a couple of games today, again, as we're taping this. Who do you think, as we look at the bracket, who do you think has the toughest path? Maybe those playing in the Thursday games, and who do you think has the easiest path? And you can't say anybody who has a double bye.
I think when you look at the toughest path, I actually think the bottom half of that bracket. I mean, let's look at Purdue. They're a 10 seed. They're one of the top 40 teams in the country, according to Ken Palm and the net rankings. And they're the 10th seed in this conference tournament. Everybody, all the bracketologists are saying Indiana's in. They're the 11th seed in this tournament. So, I mean, that Thursday and then Friday too, and we'll get into our picks here in a few minutes, but look at the potential games that Thursday and Friday.
Yep.
Ohio State looking at playing Purdue, who's desperate for another big quad one win to try to get back on the right side of the bubble. Penn State could be facing an Indiana team that kind of got a warm-up game against Nebraska, got some confidence, got used to a foreign arena and different rims, right? And then you've been rested, you're not playing well, and maybe you get off to a rusty start against a team that's a little warmer since they played yesterday. I mean, there's a lot of difficult games. Look at Michigan State's bracket, where Michigan State could have to play an Ohio State team they just blew out. So you know that there would be a revenge factor there, or a Purdue team that blew them out earlier this year. And if they beat Ohio State, Purdue's probably thinking, if we win this game on a Friday, we're in the NCAA tournament if we pull this one off too, right? You look at what Maryland could be looking at, having to play, Lamar Stevens and Penn State in a difficult matchup there. An Indiana team that should have beaten Maryland about 4 or 5 weeks ago in Bloomington, and Maryland flat out stole that game from them. And if Maryland had not done that, they wouldn't have won a share of the Big Ten championship. So, I mean, there are difficult games everywhere. I think a sneaky tough draw is Iowa's. And the reason why is is Minnesota coming into that game. There is a rivalry there. Iowa went up to their crib in mid-February, and you want to talk about thievery. Iowa did steal that game at the end and kind of got into a grinder game. With Oturu, they have a big man with athleticism to go inside and out with Luka Garza. There's a lot of really good big men in this league. But except for like a Xavier Tillman at Michigan State and a Daniel Oturu at Minnesota, there's not too many of them, though, that could play Luka Garza on the baseline, but go out and defend him on the wing as well. And then they've got an athletic guard in a Marcus Carr that I think could give some trouble to Iowa. And that's another game where Minnesota plays the night before. and they're kind of lathered up, and Iowa comes in rusty, getting used to a new arena. And then if you win that, you have a game there against, if you're Iowa, that game against Illinois, where the last two times these two teams have played. It's funny. I've kind of have switched sides on this now. So the first time around, I thought Illinois' reaction to the dunk that Iowa had was redonkulous, as my kids used to say when they were little. I mean, Illinois was still trying to foul. You're still trying to foul. It's okay that Iowa scores. There's no rule unwritten that says they have to sit there and let you hack them. Okay? I mean, if Illinois wasn't trying to foul and was standing around, then Iowa went in there for a dunk. I mean, I'm still of the thing, hey, if you don't like it, stop them, school, Mm-hmm. But at least then I could understand it. Illinois was still trying to foul when they got mad at that Iowa dunk. And so that was like the first Fran McCaffrey tantrum ever that I was in favor of and supported, because I thought it was totally justified for him to say, let's get the hell out of here. These guys are clowns. I completely agree. But then kind of to lose it over Brad Stevens, signing the triggered poster. I mean, come on, man. It's just all in good fun. And so I kind of was sympathetic to Illinois for the latest fracas between those two schools. But if they play on a Friday, round 3, with all of that still fresh in the memory banks, that one could be an absolute ton of fun. So those are some of my immediate, and I'm trying not to talk about Michigan because I get to talk about them all the time.
Yep.
Fascinating matchup for them in the first game. They've never lost to Rutgers. So at some point though, you start thinking at some point that has to flip, right? I don't know. And then your reward, if you beat them for a third time, is a Wisconsin team that just came into your crib and taught you a few things. So I don't think there's an easy, I guess this is a long-winded way of saying, Aaron, I don't believe there's an easy draw in this entire bracket.
No, there's not. No, there's not at all. And that's reflective of the season. I do tend to agree, though, that the bottom half of the bracket, I mean, whoever makes it out of Thursday, bam, turning right around and playing Michigan State or Maryland. That's not good. Now, as far as the top half of the bracket, I think that Iowa's draw is a little easier. It is sneaky. I guess sneaky is a good word for it. I think it's a little bit more favorable because if you do make it out of Thursday and into Friday, I don't think Iowa on a neutral floor is going to be that scared of Illinois. They've shot the ball well against Illinois for the most part, the 2 times that they played them this year, and kept it close, even on the road against Illinois just a week or less than a week ago now. I don't think they're going to be intimidated at all on a neutral floor against Illinois. And then, whether it's Michigan or Rutgers or Illinois or whoever makes it out of Thursday into Friday, playing Wisconsin, I just got done praising them. Guys, let's admit it, they're playing above their talent level right now. At some point, you have to think that regresses back to the mean and their overall talent level catches up with them. It could just be that they're a team of destiny this year of some sort, but you have to think at some point it catches up with them because they have been on a tear. But I agree, by and large, the entire bracket is just rough.
There's no upset. Really quick, There's no upset in that whole bracket. That even if the Michigan Rutgers winner were to upset Wisconsin, okay, you're still. I mean, Michigan's going to be like a 6th seed in the NCAA tournament. Rutgers is in the tournament, meaning that there's not some upset that opens up the bracket like anywhere. In this entire bracket, unless even if Indiana keeps going, that's another team everybody thinks is in the NCAA tournament. So unless Minnesota gets on a run and wins 2 or 3 games in a row, because I think we're discounting Nebraska and Northwestern, there really is no win in this tournament that makes you think, well, that just opens it up for everybody else. That win is not in. I don't see it up on that screen anyway.
Yeah, indeed, I agree. Let's see, picks. Do you have some picks you want to give out for the Big Ten tournament?
I do. I think Indiana will absolutely roll Nebraska, who's now adding football players to the roster.
What?
Yeah, that news came out yesterday. I think Minnesota is going to beat Northwestern, but I think that game will be tougher than people think. I think Northwestern probably got a little bit of juice from that big closing win against Penn State, but in the end, I think Daniel Oturu will be too much down low for them. I just think Rutgers is a good matchup for Michigan. If you look at a lot of the games, with the exception of Gonzaga, when Michigan just shot the bleep out of the ball, if you look at pretty much every game Michigan has lost this year, there's been one of 2 consistent themes. Number one, somebody key. They've only got really an 8-man team, okay? One of those 8 guys injured, Isaiah Livers, Xavier Simpson suspended. Eli Brooks broken nose. So it's either been one of those guys are out, or the other team has a stretch 5. And that's just a very difficult match for John Teskey and Michigan's bigs. That's not Rutgers. Rutgers is a grind it out, want to dump the ball down low team. I just think that's a good matchup for Michigan, especially with the senior point guard, and they advance. I think Minnesota pulls the upset against Iowa. There's going to be carnage in this tournament. Now, I may have the wrong upset, but you're not going to go through a year where we just had 3 champions and they all had 6 losses, guys, and then chalk's going to reign. It's not going to happen. You're putting 12 teams in the top 40 of the KenPom on one court together for 4 days. There's going to be some carnage. So maybe I called the wrong shot here, but one of those teams is going to win a game or two. So I'm going to put Minnesota in an upset over Iowa. I'm going to pick Purdue in an upset of Ohio State. I think Matt Painter is just a really good coach and kind of gets one. Now, I like Chris Holtmann a lot as a coach too, but his team's already in. And I think Matt Painter just kind of gets one in the upset. And then I have Indiana defeating Penn State to get to Friday against Maryland. I have Maryland winning there. I've got Michigan State over Purdue. I've got Illinois beating Minnesota. And then I also think Michigan will bounce back and upset Wisconsin, because I agree with you. Regression to the mean, especially when you're a team that is so reliant on the three-point shot. At some point, you're going to run into a night where you shoot 8 out of 31 or something, and you lose that game. We get to Saturday. I think Illinois' size in the backcourt is a very difficult matchup for Michigan. The multiple bigs they can throw out there, where they can go big with the 2 bigs, or play 4 out, 1 in with Kofi Cockburn. I think that's a difficult matchup for Michigan. It's why they swept the Wolverines this year, and Isaiah Livers played in both of those games. So like Illinois to get to the finals, beating Michigan on Saturday. And then I think that Michigan State-Maryland game on Saturday, I think that one, man, that's almost a Final Four level game. Yep. I'll go with Cassius Winston. I think he's got more, of a record this time of year than Anthony Cowan does. And then I think Michigan State beats Illinois on Sunday to win the Big Ten tournament for the 2nd consecutive year.
Yeah, like we were just talking about, Steve, I mean, the window is wide open. If a team like, let's say Rutgers, just gets hot for a few days from behind the arc, or a team like Ohio State even just gets hot for a few days, they could fairly easily make it to the finals. And so, it's wide open. So I'm not going to make any picks. I'm going to let you put your neck out there, because if I do that, at least I don't know if this is the same with you. During tournament season now, my picks for basketball, I mean, they're just terrible. So I've had enough losing, in sports betting. I'm just going to let your picks stand out there. Let's get to some bracketology now. I'll go through a couple of things from some well-known bracketologists out there. Jerry Palm has Maryland, Michigan State as 3 seeds, has Wisconsin as a 5 seed, Penn State as a 5 seed, Illinois as a 6, Michigan as a 7, Iowa as a 7. Those are a few of his picks. Joe Lunardi, the guy who is just amazing by picking brackets that are already mostly filled out. Anyway, he's got Wisconsin as a 4 seed. I'm just browsing here. Iowa as a 6 seed. Let's see. That's in the Midwest. Probably about the same across the board. He's got Maryland as a 4, Michigan as a 6, Illinois as a 7. In the whole world of bracketology, Steve, has anything really stood out to you as being majors, OOs, or surprises that you've seen? Because now that we have the net rankings, it's kind of a moot point.
Yeah, exactly right. I don't think there really are too many arguments anymore. And I think there's going to be a lot less arguing over seeding. And I think you've seen that the last couple of years. And one of the things, a popular bracket trend was that 5-12 upset that has not been the trend the last few years since they introduced the net rankings. So we're still going to get into outliers. I think Indiana's an outlier. If you look at Indiana's net ranking, that's not, they're either right on the bubble or a team that doesn't make it. On the other hand, they've got a half dozen quad 1 wins. Right? There's not a lot of teams in college basketball that have that. And so I think this has set up the ideal situation for the committee, where the season that you played is going to determine the vast majority of this. You know, when I used to teach high school kids, one of the things they would say to me is, "Hey, you know, I have a question about this grade you gave me." And I used to reply, "I didn't give you any grade. You took the test. I didn't take the test. Whose name's on the test? Yours. You took the test. These are the answers. These are how many of the answers you got right. So this isn't the grade that I gave you. It is the grade that you earned." And what I like about the net, I'm sure there's some things about the formula we could tweak, but in the end, it's based off the season you had, right? Okay. And so a lot of the mystery about this is gone. And then you're going to have a couple of outliers, and that's where you have the human element. The committee comes in and says, yeah, we know Indiana's got a 55 net or whatever it is, but they've got 6 or 7 quad 1 wins. And that's more that, you know, Northern Iowa doesn't have any. So, and even though Northern Iowa's, you know, and that's net rankings 15, 20 points higher. I mean, we all know Indiana's had a better season, so they're getting in. And that's where the human element comes in.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I was going, because in our neck of the woods, you know, Northern Iowa, the regular season Missouri Valley champions, they beat Drake by about 20 points, and then 6 days later lost to Drake by 20 points in the first round of the Missouri Valley Conference tournament. They have a net ranking right now, as I'm looking at it, of about 48. The person or the team, I should say, that went on to win the Missouri Valley Championship has a net ranking that is about 50 points lower, lower than that. And, you know, if you want to compare UNI and Indiana or any team, there's a bunch of bubble teams that are way below what UNI's net rankings is, or net ranking is. You know, that's absolutely right. There has to be, it can't be hard and fast all of the time, because, I mean, I don't know what you think. I've followed Northern Iowa a lot this season. I think their starting 5 is as good as any team in the country. Now, the rest of their team, you know, the depth as it is always in the mid-major, but I think they actually deserve to get in. But that's where the net ranking can hurt those mid-major or low mid-major teams who may deserve to actually go into the tournament if they were in maybe any other league. But because they're in a low mid-major, they may get caught out because they tripped up.
Yeah, they're not going to make it. You can't don't lose to Drake by 20 points.
Yeah.
You know, you can't, and then have a team with a net ranking of 100 win your conference tournament.
Yeah, they can. I mean, they can come back and say, "Well, we didn't 2 times. We beat them by 10, and we beat them by 20, but we had 1 slip up against them." So there's all kinds of arguments that you can make. But yeah, bracketology is, I don't know, buy, sell, or hold. Bracketology is a dying art, at least in its essence right now.
I think it's a dying art this time of year. I don't think what, you know, Joe Lunardi in the bunker is as meaningful as it was 5 or 6 years ago, because so much of this process is now known. I think it still is interesting before we get to the end of the season, right? When people haven't been reading the net rankings and stuff on a regular basis. But right now, a lot of this information is known, and so there's not nearly the mystery to it. These guys aren't, you know, telling us about 8 or 9 teams we don't know about or aren't sure about. We're really talking about 4 teams for 1 or 2 spots is what we're really talking about.
We literally have to get out of here in about 5 minutes, Steve. So really quick, rapid fire. Big Ten Player of the Year, that's Luka Garza for the University of Iowa. Coach of the Year, Greg Gard. A little bit of surprise there, but I don't think he's undeserving.
No, he would have been mine without question.
I don't think he's undeserving at all about that.
And it's a strong year for coaching in the league, but he would have been mine without question.
Yes, and then Coburn won, what do they call it now? Is it Freshman of the Year, Rookie of the Year?
I call it Rookie of the Year because it could be redshirt freshman, a JUCO transfer, Newcomer of the Year, I think is what it's called.
I think all 3 of these guys completely deserving.
I agree. I think if the season were a little bit longer, at the way he's trending, Rocket Watts at Michigan State would have been in the conversation. Yeah. If we were only deciding based on the last 6 weeks, Franz Wagner at Michigan would have been on the conversation. But if you're looking at from the whole entire season, Kofi Coburn transformed Illinois. I mean, they were terrible last year because they were one of the worst rebounding teams in the country. His presence turned them into one of the best, and then you saw a 10-game improvement. That's not a coincidence. That is exactly what my ballot would have been if I had a vote, is what the results actually turned out to be.
And that's Big 5 on Bigger 10.
We'll come back and play this week's game of Big Ten Would You Rather next.
Bigger 10 is brought to you by Michigan Podcast. If you like what you're hearing today and would like to support us, head on over to Patreon, patreon.com/Michigan Podcast, where if you live somewhere where sports wagering is illegal, you can find Steve's picks for various games. So far in basketball, college basketball this year, he's been on fire. That's patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. You can get his game day picks, which he posts almost every day now for just $5 a month. In the process, you can say thank you for creating this podcast on YouTube or via podcast, wherever you listen. Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast.
Back here on Bigger 10, and let's get to this week's edition of Would You Rather. Aaron, would you rather coach Nebraska or Northwestern in basketball? Which of those two and why?
That's a really good question. My gut, which is kind of what you coach me or coach us to do all the time, just go with your gut. If you're asked something and you don't know, my gut says Nebraska. I just think the facilities and probably the money that you have, and Northwestern's nothing to sneeze at least in their football program anymore, but I would still rather coach at Nebraska. I think the brand overall there, even though they have similar traditions or lack thereof in basketball, I think the overall brand there is probably easier to build upon than it is at Northwestern.
Okay.
This one's for you. Would you rather have one shining moment in the Sweet 16 or get blown out in the Elite 8?
I think I'd always rather have the one shining moment. When I was a kid, one of the greatest upsets in college basketball history at that point, when it came to the NCAA tournament, is in 1984, North Carolina had a phenomenal team. Michael Jordan, Sam Perkins together. Brad Doherty was a freshman on that team. Kenny Smith was a freshman on that team. I mean, that team was absolutely loaded. They got upset in the Sweet 16 by Bob Knight and the Indiana Hoosiers. I think that was Steve Alford's freshman year. I think Uwe Blob was on that team. And I mean, that was an okay team, but not a vintage Bob Knight edition of the Hoosiers. And I think Indiana, they lost the very next round in the Elite 8 because they didn't make the Final Four that year. No one really remembers that though, because of the magnitude of that upset, right? Like, do you remember what Maryland-Baltimore County did the second round after what they did to Virginia? No.
Not a dang thing.
No. So give me the one shining moment for sure.
All right.
Would you rather, Aaron, try to beat a team for a third time in the same basketball season in a one-and-done postseason tournament, or have to upset a number one seed in that same situation?
Upset a number one seed. I mean, looking at what I might have had a different answer last year, about this time last year. And then it was how many times? Was it 3 or 4 times? No, it was 3 times in the same season that Michigan State beat Michigan. And that was
last year.
Yeah,
thank you for reminding me.
I'm sorry. And you would think that would be against my case. That is just like so far out of the ordinary that it's just that you just don't see that very often at all, which is why it stood out to me in my memory. And so I would rather take down a number one seed than try to beat the same team for a third time in one season. Of course, you didn't tell me what kind of a team. If you're evenly matched with that team, I'd rather take the number one seed over that.
Yeah, well, the presumption was that you had to beat the number one seed to kind of to bolster your NCAA tournament resume.
Gotcha.
So I guess I should have included that. So would you rather have to beat a team a third time to do that, or would you rather have to beat the number one seed to do that? Which would you rather? What do you think is easier?
Probably. Oh boy.
What if I told you since 2000?
Yeah.
Teams that are trying to beat a team for a third time are literally 50-50 against the point spread in college basketball.
50-50?
It's literally 50.8% since 2000.
That actually surprises me a lot.
Yeah, I would have thought that
it would have been a lot worse.
It would have been worse. Yeah, that the team that the underdog there would have done better. But yeah, it's 50-50.
Interesting. Let's see. This last one's for you. Would you rather have a coach who cheats and wins a natty in year one and then gets found out, or a coach who cheats repeatedly, is competitive for a few years but never wins a natty?
I mean, to me, if we're going to cheat, then I mean,
cheat gloriously.
No doubt. I mean, as Martin Luther once said, if you're going to sin boldly. Okay, so let's cheat and win a natty, right? I mean, as a Michigan fan, I know a little bit about teams that are consistently good all the time, but then rarely win natties. I know a little bit about that in various sporting endeavors. Okay, so give me the natty, man. If we're gonna cheat. I'd prefer not to cheat to win a natty, but if we're good at cheat, then I'd rather win the natty than just go 9-3 or 10-2 in football all the time, or make the Sweet 16 all the time. No, I want to cut down some nets, brother. That's what I want to do.
Bigger 10 is also brought to you by Wolverine Digest from Sports Illustrated. You can find that at wolverinedigest.com. For all of you Michigan fans, you can find a daily rundown of all the hottest topics from basketball and football to recruiting and much, much more. That's wolverinedigest.com, a part of Sports Illustrated.
This week's Twitter poll, we asked the audience who's going to win the Big Ten tournament. We just looked at the number 1 seeds and then gave you the field. Wisconsin, only 3.5% of you think Wisconsin's going to win it. A little less than 10% think Maryland. 23% said Michigan State. 63.8% took the field. Someone else. And I think given the strength of the Big Ten, if I were betting, that would be the right value bet, would be to take the field because of how deep this league is.
I was just going to say the exact same thing. I mean, that's when you're looking at bets, you're looking at what's the best value. And if it was 110 on, or, even 110, something like that on each of the first 3 teams there, and 110 on someone else, obviously that's going to be now it wouldn't be that, but that would be the best value there. So
this week's question of the week comes from Nick Richards, who says, can you remember a less talented or more fortunate Big Ten champion than Wisconsin? I cannot. Well, fortunate, I think he means the schedule.
Yeah.
You played 20 games in this conference. Nobody played an easy schedule, man.
Yep.
And then you look at, they played some good teams in the non-conference as well. Okay. Wisconsin has more quad 1 wins than anybody in college basketball. So I'm not going to buy into the easy schedule. There's no easy schedule in this league this year when you play 20 games. Okay. But in terms of talent, no, I don't remember a less talented team winning the championship. Indiana had a team one year when I was growing up in 1989. Illinois had the Flying Illini, and Michigan was terrific with Glenn Rice and company. That was a loaded year in the Big Ten. Iowa had B.J. Armstrong and Roy Marble, and Bob Knight came up through the rear and as a dark horse, and Indiana won the title that year. And the rest of that, most of that team was not good, but it had an NBA first round pick on it named Jay Edwards, who I think was Big Ten MVP. There's nobody like that for Wisconsin. This is the least talented team, and they did it in a year where the league is this deep. Yeah, I'm not going to go at them at all for being fortunate.
Nope.
No way.
No. They had an advantageous schedule, let's say, down the stretch, the last 4 or 5 games. Their win streak, though, half of that was just as difficult as anybody else in the rest of the league.
And so keep in mind, advantageous is relative.
Yeah.
That means go into Bloomington, Indiana, and win on the last day of the season. Go into Ann Arbor and beat them, with Xavier Simpson and Isaiah Livers in the lineup. Yeah. Yes, their schedule, I will agree, just by looking at it on paper, was more advantageous, but taking advantage of it was still not easy.
No, on the whole, it's not. They're not playing at any different teams than the rest of the league were or was. So as much as it pains me to say, they earned every ounce of that, and God bless them.
That'll do it for this week's episode of Bigger 10. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Bigger 10 throughout the week. Like, rate, subscribe, 5-star review, whichever the case may be, whether it's YouTube or iTunes, wherever it's available for you to help us get the word out and help us to grow the show. We would greatly appreciate it. Thanks to all of you for tuning in. Next week, the Big 10 in the Big Dance. Until then, this is Bigger 10.